we're going. All right, there we go. All right, we're live. No preamble for this one. So today we're just doing another round of hot takes. Howard, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I was going to say the podcast is the preamble for this one. Yeah, sure. I guess I'll go with my first one that's slightly easier to explain. And basically, AI being a big hot topic, obviously. All these jobs that are like considered to be like eliminated. I think like now with like the language models, like the copywriting jobs and all this stuff is like very at the forefront. But the one job that I think will actually be fairly quickly eliminated, and I'm very hopeful this comes to pass, is like what I would term like mediocre middleman jobs. And like the two examples that I think of is real estate agent and car salesman. And I kind of think of these like jobs as like, it's when you're doing transactions that are like you don't do, like the consumer doesn't transact in these things very often. Like, you go to the grocery store, buy groceries. You don't need a agent for that because you do that every week. You get used to it. You kind of know what you want, what you need, how to do it. House, car, that's another thing. Most people purchase one of those quite infrequently. And there can be, especially with like a house, like there can be a lot of like market particulars and like the type, purchasing a condo versus a house. So you might have bought a condo before, but it's very different than buying a detached home. So, and it's a huge purchase. So a lot of people like get comfort out of like having someone that is supposed to, I guess, know kind of the ins and outs of how the market works. And so these people charge a big premium and quite a bit of money to basically, act as like the quote unquote expert in the transaction. And I think AI will be a very easy move to replace those people by just having an AI that is on like acts as like the quote unquote expert for the buyer's slot and or seller in those transactions. Like for real estate, to be buyer and seller would want, an AI on their side. Essentially an AI on either side of the transaction. And like car selling too, I think that'll just be eliminated by AI as well to a large degree, because people will be able to much easier compare vehicles, kind of compare terms, that kind of thing, and it just won't be, you won't have to rely on a sales staff to make you feel comfortable about the transaction, because that's like more or less what these people are doing, right? Is like making you feel comfortable about making a big purchase that most people make only once every few years at the most. And therefore, I think people will quite quickly be able to, especially with like the natural language model AIs, where it's like they basically feel like it's a personal assistant that's an expert in the area that's on their side. I think they'll give up like the need for like a real estate agent. They'll like be comfortable relying on an AI. That's like part, and I don't know exactly how it would play out, but I could imagine like a service that will basically connect you with like an AI seller, or like agent, essentially, say for buying a home, and you don't need an actual agent, and they won't take nearly as much of a margin for the service, right? You'll have some sort of disruptive company that comes in and says, instead of taking, I don't even know what real estate agents charge, but it's usually like a flat amount in the thousands plus like a percent.
Yeah, I think it's like 2 or 3% or something.
Yeah, when I bought my house, it was like just over 10 grand in fees.
Yeah, so I think there's margin there, right? Like I think a company that has an AI on doing the same thing will be able to outcompete.
Oh yeah,
someone
like,
that
if instead of tacking in $10,000 on your house purchase for the real estate agent fees, even if it's $2,000, like that $8,000 difference, like I would guess the big majority of people would be willing to at least try out the AI.
I don't know about a majority. I think it would break down by generation. But then there's an interesting thing. I think a lot of your first time home buyers, like the millennials and Gen Z, would be absolutely all for the AI.
Yeah,
But there's a lot
and
of
as
home
time
buying,
progresses, like there's going to be less and less boomers, right, buying homes.
yeah, there's a lot of home buying that occurs with boomers and now the older Gen X that are selling their homes and buying new homes. And I doubt you'll be able to wean them off the real life comfort of a human being,
Yeah,
even if
but
it saves them a couple $1,000s.
give it another 10 years, and a lot of those people will have moved out of the market, like the purchasing market.
Yeah, but you don't even need them on both sides of the transaction, right? Like Colin was saying, like millennials and Gen Z, if they go to buy, I could see a company easily, capturing a large percentage of like the buyer market in that respect, and if the seller's still an old school, some boomer selling and they're using old school real estate agent,
Yeah, they can.
you'll
They
be
can
able
eat that fee.
yeah, and
Buy
they'll be
side
able
doesn't
to.
have to.
The AI will be able to stand in on one side of the transaction, even if a human's on the other side, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I definitely didn't need a real estate agent. I was just forced to use one. It's not that complicated to buy a home. It's not. Like, I did all the comparison.
yeah, you are kind of forced in terms of
I know.
a lot of the time they won't deal with you, but I think that's where it's going to shift, where there's just going to be so much like financial pressure on people just like getting like I already see it like such a discontent with the real estate system and with the real estate market in Canada in terms of the real estate agent model. Like so many people hate it that I think there'll just be enough momentum that it'll break down.
Well, one of the big
Relatively
problems I can see existing right now that I've never looked into, but I just imagine, is that now that you have the internet, you can research all this stuff and you can be more knowledgeable than a real estate agent about buying a home, but you still need to get a real estate agent. Which
Well, you
would
can
be
do private
very
sale, but
irritating.
you typically, like, you don't have to, but a lot of people, like, they're not going to, like, they might not be willing to deal with you private sale if you're not represented.
It's a bit cartelly, like because there's lots of stories about, they like if say the seller gets a real estate agent, yeah, the real estate agent will literally not show the home to any private like buyers.
Yeah.
They will only show the home to people that are represented by a real estate agent. But I think that like that will be an impediment for sure. But I think that like once you get a little bit of a sliver of the market kind of opened up, then it'll just like people will just realize how cancerous it is to deal with real estate agents. And I think that's the same with like car salespeople. Like people, I don't know a single person that is like enjoys car salesmen's like dealing with a car salesman like at all. Like even boomers hate it. Like,
but I would say like right now, the thing is, if you're trying to do a private represent yourself in a real estate sale, their justification for ignoring you or not dealing with you or showing you the place or anything like that would be that there are people out there trying to represent themselves who don't know anything, and it's just going to cause a headache for everybody. Whereas once you have sort of a large language model tailored to how real estate works, they can't use that argument against it because it is set up to know how to go about the process of purchasing real estate without causing a debacle.
yeah, exactly. Like that. Well, that's what I mean. Like the AI will be the handholder, and it'll just be way cheaper because the company running the AI doesn't actually have to pay a person. They have, whatever, a few dollars in compute power put towards the task, right? And that's so. And I think there's a lot of these instances where you could see this happening. Like the two that jumped out to me were like real estate and cars, but I think there's going to be more and more industries where essentially like the person providing the service, all they're there for is like to be a comfort because they know more than the consumer or whatever, right?
That's definitely what I like. When I bought a house, that definitely was like the value that I could see was being provided. Like the real estate agent did kind of understand, because my real estate agent had he'd lived in the city that I bought in for his whole life, so he kind of knew which neighborhoods were good, which ones were not, and like that did provide some value. But it's not anything you couldn't actually feed into some AI machine, like some AI model, and could tell you about like, okay, here's crime stats, here's all of this for each neighborhood, bang, here you go. like there's already tons of articles on like whatever city you want to move to, or whatever city you already live in when you're looking to buy a home. There's going to be tons of articles on, like, oh, what's the nightlife like all those different things are going to be there, accessible. And if you have an AI model that's trained on all of that, it's like, well, this just spits out a summary for you. You don't even have to cycle through 70 different pages to figure out like the neighborhood. And that level of information is going to be way higher than any one agent's going to ever know.
Well, I just think that I think that information is already there, like you're saying. But the thing that people don't have is like basically someone they can quote unquote talk to that gives them comfort about like their decision making process and that kind of thing. Like they just need someone to like bounce their their decision off of, to like that quote unquote knows the industry, to like be reassured that they're not making a huge fuck up in terms of like their decision on buying a house, right? Because they don't do it often enough. Like people, when you're doing a transaction that you do all the time, like you just get used to doing it and you kind of know what's good value, what's bad value, what you're going to regret, what you're not going to regret at the grocery store kind of thing. You just don't do that for a house. So you need someone else that deals in that. And I think like with the large language model AI types, it'll have like enough of a human feel that you will be comfortable like just kind of bouncing things off of it. Like, oh, what, you can just ask a natural question and get a natural response. I'm like, oh, what does this neighborhood look like? Or should I, I have 2 kids. Do you think this is enough square footage? That kind of, like, you can ask all these random things that before you're just kind of on your own researching, and it feels different, qualitatively different than just being able to like basically talk to like an avatar that actually feels like an advisor.
Yeah,
which is what a real estate agent is, right? Like it's
the one thing that you could argue that you might not be able to replace with AI is like a walkthrough of the house. Like if you're going to purchase a home, you want to do a walkthrough, and if you have a good real estate agent, they come with you and they can spot things that you might not be able to spot yourself. So I could see that being a little bit of a disincentive there. But to me, if it's an order of magnitude cheaper to hire the AI, you can then ask the AI itself, like, okay, what things do I need to look at when I'm walking around this house to like pay attention to see if there's problems that like would kind of be like already deal breakers that might be like not the obvious ones, like, oh, the house smells like piss and smoke. Okay, something horrible has happened in here. Don't buy this house. But like smaller things where you're noticing like minor things that could be indicative of bigger problems that like it does require a bit more of a trained eye to look at.
Well, first, 2 things. Firstly, can I introduce you to our Lord and Savior Zuckerberg and the concept of the metaverse? You don't have to go into a home. Like, what are you, from the 90s? And then, secondly, not a large language model, but with the AI visual learning that is coming out, theoretically, an AI, well, not theoretically, almost certainly an AI could be trained to notice defects from visual stimuli, seeing things that a human eye wouldn't even catch.
Yeah, so, but again, I feel like that type of
addressable.
That I feel like that tech might be a bit longer than like the replacement of the other components that we were discussing.
Like I feel like it's improvement. Like a home improvement or home renovation thing being developed that you could then apply to that, and because like your phone camera can already pick up more information that a computer can extract out of your phone camera than your human eye can with your brain. I've seen, and this was years ago, maybe 4 years ago, they were just using a basic smartphone camera to watch the vibrations of a cardboard bag in a room while people were talking, and then reverse engineer the vibrations of that bag to try and figure out what the people were saying. I don't know, the cell phones, the cameras that everyone has in their pocket are just incredibly accurate already.
I was gonna say, I think how well like an AI like that will work is questionable, but I guarantee something in that vein is already like possible but it might not be that good. But it'll get very much better over the next few years for sure. Like,
I think the first phase would be kind of diagnosing problems for homeowners themselves. Someone might make an app for something like that.
Yeah, and then that'll transfer to like real estate, yeah, for sure. But I think a lot of those things are already like possible if enough mind power is put towards it, right? Like, it's just a question of like getting the compute and getting the idea off the ground. Like,
it'll be Apple's VR headset. That'll be it. You just gotta plug that into a little battery pack on your hip.
Or definitely at the point where you can just see the potential, and like yeah, the question is what will be realized.
Because honestly, I always already had like I have a problem with like buying stuff already where I like to research everything that I buy, and then dealing with salespeople, they're usually less knowledgeable about things than you are once you've researched for like 45 minutes. And it's just going to be so nice to be able to deal with AI, and like especially companies that actually have product that they really invest money into, like making AI that pitches their products for them and like summarizes the the qualities and the comparisons and all this stuff. Is going to be so much nicer to deal with a competent salesperson for once, instead of what you generally get when you go to a fucking store and try to buy shit. And again, like, yeah, I think the high margin ones where like the salesperson is sucking down like a relatively large fraction of the transaction price, especially large transaction prices in homes and stuff, is those guys they're in the freaking crosshairs for sure.
Oh yeah.
The other one, in the same vein, but the opposite side of the spectrum, I think that's coming with AI is monthly billing. And if I had any coding expertise, I'd be working on this, because I'm sure somebody already is, and it's going to make them a lot of money. But an AI assistant where you pay something like $5 a month and it manages your monthly bills and searches deals for you and negotiates with salespeople on your behalf, that's the future.
There's already a few projects I've seen, like projects where they've coded it to do sales negotiations like that. And the other one I've seen is dating app conversations.
Oh, yeah, that's what I've also considered just personally using. Like, that'd be such a ticket.
Just have you use the AI model to generate conversation.
Hide your autism as long as possible.
Who actually talks or acts in the same way in person as they do on text. So, I mean, I think you'd be able to get away with it pretty well.
Oh, yeah, I don't think... I think it would be probably dependent on how savvy the person receiving the messages is, right? Like, if the person is completely oblivious of large language models and doesn't use ChatGPT or whatever other thing that is utilized themselves, then they would have no clue. Like, the tech person that uses AI frequently would probably pick up on it.
So few people have actually experienced the large language models. Whenever I've brought this up to anybody, although I'm in the buttfuck nowhere, all anyone knows about AI is from the news. Like, nobody personally experiments with it.
Man, I work at a massive company that's like, all about the tech stuff, and we're just finally talking about it. But like 95% of the people that I talk to about it within the company itself, like, just no fucks given. They're like, oh, that's kind of cool, but kind of weird. It's like, hey, no, this shit's gonna, it's a big deal. Oh, sure it is. That's how all the conversations I've ever had go. It's like, okay.
Most of the people I know, like in a work setting or whatever, they know and have used ChatGPT. So
yeah, you're probably more in the crowd that's urbanized and with the tech.
Well, I'm in the urbanized, somewhat techie scenario, but
maybe your city is just full of retards.
Yeah, I think you're kind of in Cowtown, as I would call it.
That's true. Maybe might be a little bit more cowboy. Like,
you want to be cowboys.
Especially, like, I kind of have a little bit of... You overhear conversations of, like, people in actual tech, like, software companies and stuff, and they're all over it. Like,
like, if
them are already using it for their...
You've got to have your finger on the pulse at the very least.
Yeah, I think those jobs definitely attract people that are like willing to like try all the newest stuff, because if you don't last long in tech, if you don't like try new things, like unless you're stuck in some like esoteric like shitty role that uses some old code that will never change for the next 200 years, like government position.
Yeah, you definitely got to be on top of it.
Well, I think yeah, that's all she wrote on that one. But yeah, I don't know. I pray that it comes true, and I don't have to deal with a real estate agent ever again, or
The future's
ever.
bright.
Price, you're up next.
Okay, well, there's no sugarcoating this one. Just gonna have to tell it to you straight. And for all those Chinese listeners who are on here spying on us without leaving a view because they've got that sort of technology, they're gonna love this one. But the fact of the matter is, all Chinese history is false. It's like you hear it and you give it the sniff test, and you're like, "This is absolute shit."
Just
And
banned for hate speech.
yeah, it's like the whole world. Well, the whole world being the Western world. You know, I'm not even going to qualify it. The whole world is just like, yeah, the Chinese history, that must be the way it was because, they wrote it down on paper hundreds of years ago, and all those books survived. And nobody's ever thought of lying about history or fabricating things or making
And
up
it's not like
numbers.
they ever had a great purge of their culture at one point.
Yeah, there's just been nothing that could ever interfere with this history. It's basically just handed down the gospel truth as it was of how Chinese history went down. And then you start reading it, and it basically, well, actually, no, I don't start reading. I listen to people who read it. And those people say that these centralized dictatorships or empires, however you want to refer to the Chinese, because sometimes they were ruled by Chinese emperors and sometimes the steppe people rolled in and ruled them as emperors, but maybe that was more of a military dictatorship. And it makes the current Communist Party look like a Tea Party because they've just got no control over what the people do compared to these old centralized empires where, if you did one thing that the emperor didn't like, heads lopped off. It's like, oh, how far are you from the capital? Oh, we're on the other edge of China. Just instantly. Instant communication that you've done something wrong and you're dead. And disregard the fact that your fastest speed of transport was a boat on a river, and your second fastest was a horse going over land with a written note. It's like, no, the emperor decides something and it just instantly affects the entire country, and the whole country revolves around the will of the emperor. And it's one of those things that just nobody seems to question. This vast centralization and ability to mobilize, allegedly, millions of men to go fight in wars. Basically, effectively, they would have a centralized government that was at least as good, if not superior, to anything Europe had in the 1900s, if you believe their history. Like going into the First World War, Germany, France, Britain, those would all be comparable to what China is alleged to have been, except that obviously China is a much larger landmass, has to govern much more far-flung provinces, but, achieved this level of bureaucracy and coordination 2,000 years ago. And then you have the fact that they were conquered by these steppe tribes repeatedly, which kind of invalidates the idea that there's some massive centralized bureaucracy able to wield hundreds of thousands of men at their lowest and millions at their highest. And these steppe tribes of, 20,000 horsemen here, 30,000 horsemen there are picking away at them, raiding them. And then, once in a while when they get together, maybe there's 40 or 50,000 of these steppe tribesmen. They just conquer the country. It's like, yeah, you have 1 million Chinamen, but we have 50,000 horse archers. So you're pretty much done. You're 20 to 1 odds. You got nothing on us.
It seems a little bit of a stretch there.
Well, the best part, the cherry on top, is that when you read about the Qing dynasty, which in case you don't know much Chinese history, those were the poor sops who got saddled with dealing with the Europeans once the Europeans were flexing on everybody. And the Qing dynasty figured all this attempt at centralization was inefficient, so they sort of decentralized almost out of necessity in order to run the country better. And the best example of this that's incredible and shows exactly what the sort of decentralization they had is that they had 3 different names for the English, one that was used by the Western province, one that was used by the Southern province, and one that was used by the Eastern province. And the central government didn't realize that these three different peoples they were trading with in these provinces were all the English, because they didn't have enough centralization to communicate that fact. And they had these provincial governments operating in local dialects. And then the official government was Manchu, which was another steppe tribe. And so they were operating in, I assume, Manchu. Could be wrong about that because I watched this video a while ago. But, you know, if somehow Chinese civilization reached its apogee 2,000 years earlier, and these Qing people just could not figure out how to run their country, as well as the Jin or the, I can't remember any other dynasty names. Let's just say the 2,000-year-old dynasties. They just couldn't figure out how to replicate that success, and then they got torn apart by the Europeans. But that was, you're expected to basically believe that the Qing dynasty was an anomaly of how weak it was and how decentralized it was, and that those previous dynasties were much better. And there's just, you know, the Manchu took over for no explicable reason. It just beggars belief. And I guess to put this in a European context, what's been happening in the last 100 years, probably 200 years if you're being realistic, is a lot of rewriting of ancient history to make it more in line with archaeological fact. And I think that's the biggest thing that's just not happening in China, because you're not allowed to rewrite Chinese history because it's already been written. But, you know, the Greeks at Thermopylae, it was 300 Spartans fighting off 1 million Persians, and then it was 200,000 Persians, and then it was 40,000 Persians. And then it's like, yeah, maybe it wasn't even that, because, like, look at the logistics and how difficult it would be to supply 40,000 Persians in that neck of the woods. And the same sort of logic has certainly not been applied to the Chinese, yet the historians that cover European history and give you those sort of explanations then just throw their incredulity away when dealing with Chinese history and just throw absurd numbers at you. Millions of people fighting each other like it's absolute fact, inarguable. And it's like, you know what? I think they probably have the same problem that Europe did 200 years ago when discussing their history.
Probably a worse problem, too, in the sense that, like, China was, like, a unified region for a long time. So there wasn't any, like, dissenting...
perspective.
Yeah, perspective or narrator, right? Like, in European history, it was, like, a mishmash of various, you know, principalities that were less... centralized than the Chinese one. So, you know, like the French might have some French historian, or a lot of the time wouldn't even been French until recently. It would have been whatever portion of that, Orleans or whatever the hell, might write about some battle with the Italians and give one perspective, and then the Italian city-state that fought would have given another perspective, and you can kind of cobble together some triangulation of information based on these different reports and suss out a little bit of the bias and the bullshit, right? Whereas in a region like China, you're probably going to have a lot of it that's just like...
It's just Chinese writings on it, right?
Yeah, like the predominant, like, empire, or, like, yeah, emperor, and, like, his sanctioned historians or whatever, the bureaucracy it's all Han Chinese and very unified, and I think that would just make another layer of, like, credulity, like, where it's just like, oh yeah, this is definitely true, and this is how it is, and, like, there's no one, like, in the region that's going, oh, this is total bullshit, like, here's what actually happened.
Well, what I heard as the method by which most of these Chinese histories were recorded is that people would obviously record history while it was happening, but that the official, it wouldn't be state sanctioned, but Han Chinese sanctioned, I guess you could say, is that the scholars would sit down at the fall of an empire or a transition of dynasty, and they would write the official history of that dynasty at the end of it. Like, and then that would be the official history, and everything before that was written down that was contemporary to events would just be ignored. in favor of this official history that was written at the end of the dynasty. And some of these dynasties were a couple hundred years. So you've got the official history of 300 years ago is written 300 years later, and the contemporary accounts are then disregarded.
And it's like group thinked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That seems sketchy. Seems a sketchy way to do things. In my
thing that really got my goat about this was listening to someone's take on the Roman Empire that I don't find disagreeable, is pretty reasonable. Is that basically the Roman Empire existed in order to field the legions, and at its height there were maybe, the highest estimates put it about 750,000 soldiers in the Roman army in the entire empire. They could never gather them all in one place. Maybe you'd get 100,000 in one place if you had a big campaign. But you'd have like 750,000 garrisoning the whole empire. And the argument was basically that the entire empire, in the end, existed to fund and equip these legionaries. And that it was pretty much a decentralized series of military bases that created an empire by the fact that they prevented anyone else having a military base within that region, which makes a lot of sense. But then you contrast that with the depiction of China, where it's this basically modern state 2,000 years ago, where everything's run from a central location. And like the Romans basically were alleged to be super decentralized, and the Chinese are super centralized. And it's like, how could you possibly be centralized to that degree with the technology of the time? It just seems simply impossible. The Roman explanation makes a lot more sense. You've got groups of legionnaires, and they've got to hold down the fort in their area, and once in a while they get specific orders. But generally speaking, they're just running the border, making sure no barbarians roll in, and making sure no peasants form up in revolt.
Yeah, I think it would be very difficult for any like modern person to contemplate running an empire without communication technology, right? Like, it's crazy to think of, like, it would take your message weeks or months to travel the span of the empire, right? Like, how would you keep things in any sort of
strongly
centralized grip? And especially since, like, you're having to delegate the message sending to a messenger that, like, oh, maybe they're not every message is going to be faithfully relayed, or you know what I mean, like
the messenger gets waylaid or sick or shot, like,
or some schemer replaces the emperor's message with his own, you know what I mean, like, oh yeah, this is definitely the emperor's seal, and this is definitely the message you're supposed to send. It's not like you're getting the secure email communication from
they have the signet ring, okay?
.com.
That was a huge deal in Alexander's empire after they split up, was who got the signet ring, because that was the only way that you could authorize the orders to the far-flung regions of the empire.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, that's the type of technology you're relying on, is a ring seal, right? It's not infallible for sure. So I don't know. It just definitely seems tough to believe that there was much coordination between the different regions of China, like, to a strong degree.
That's my last point, is that I think the reason this happens is a sort of romanticism for, like, some past that's sort of mystical or heroic or incredible and astonishing that you can't really have for Europe as much anymore, because we know too much about European history. But it can still exist in this idea of Chinese history, because they wrote it down to be this sort of centralized, everything flowed through the emperor and everything was based on the emperor, and it has that sort of romantic vision, and it's still there, and historians deep down, they're like, I want to believe that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty solid explanation, because you get a lot of that, like, mystical thinking. That it seems like there's definitely a correlation between, like, how little is known about a region and its peoples and its history, like solidly, and like how much, like, mysticism and, like, romanticism about the history. You know what I mean? Like, the accounts are very romantic, and kind of mystical, and like it was a different, literally a different world that adhered to different physics based on like the accounts you get from those areas.
Like the beauty of China being that they have tons of accounts that back up that way of thinking, because that's how the Chinese wanted to write their own history in the first place.
Yeah, and the physical evidence be damned, right? Like,
yeah,
I agree.
All right,
that's about all I've got for that.
All right. Well, I think we can move on to mine then. So my first one is actually about the labor shortage that people have been jumping up and down about in Canada, the States as well, but I'll mostly focus on Canada. For months and months and months, all we hear about is like labor shortage, and I'm gonna say that's fake news.
Speak for yourself. In rural Canada is not fake news for sure.
Yeah, I think that would be a little tongue in cheek, but I actually think that like there's a couple different reasons, because a lot of say it's like, oh, like a lot of the reasonings given just seem to be such horseshit. I think we actually do have in some areas like actual labor shortages, because I think one of the main causes that of the labor shortage is just like male participation in the workforce is down quite a bit comparatively to 30 years ago, 40 years ago. That's been pretty much proven. So you are going to actually see some shortages over that, but I actually think that a lot of the labor shortages stem from companies just wanting cheap labor, like literally just wanting to suppress labor wages, and so they just don't want to fill positions. And even StatsCan kind of came out and said that very recently. They're like, yeah, there seems to be a bit of a mismatch here. And so I think a lot of the constant, because at least in the business world, so this is a hot take more for maybe not the general population, but for the business world, is just constant whining about labor shortages. And to me, it really seems like a lot of that stems from just not wanting to have to push up wages and trying to get as much cheap labor from overseas as possible. So constantly petitioning the government, hey, we can't find any workers at all. There's nobody to do this. There's nothing we can do. You gotta bring in more people and make sure that that'll just keep wages down, right? They don't want that to increase. So and really funnily enough, I've been thinking about this for a little while, and then StatsCan just came out and said that about a week ago. They're like, yeah, that's actually their view. And I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. That's definitely something that I figured was going on, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we could be so short of workers despite the level of immigration that we've had, and it just strikes me as a little suspicious.
Well, I would say the split I would see between rural and urban Canada is what you're saying probably applies to most of urban Canada, but rural Canada does have a case of the old resource curse, where a lot of our wealth in rural Canada comes from raw resources like oil and lumber and coal, and then those jobs pay so much better than any service industry jobs that good luck finding someone born in Canada willing to work a service industry job.
So
not finding an urban Canadian willing to move to rural Canada to work a job either.
You're saying the labor shortages, wage suppression is causing it, is it more or less?
Con?
Oh, sorry.
I was saying, you're saying that the wage, it's lack of wage increases is causing it, or wage kind of a reluctance to pay more wages in Canada?
I think that's a part of it. I think the narrative that I kept seeing within the business world is oh, it's just we're economy's such hot shit and it's amazing. We just need more and more. And I think a part of what is going on that was not being acknowledged or discussed is I think companies are not as willing, because wage growth in Canada has been pretty dog shit. for like a long time. I've looked into it, and I think that a lot of companies are not willing to try to push up the wages offered. So instead of doing that, they're just saying like, oh, well, we can't find anybody. You know, look, guys, like you're going to have to increase the number of like temporary workers and whatnot, because we just can't fill the jobs at like the level that, at the level that we need, when it's like, well, typically if you were going to actually try to rectify that, you would offer more money, but they just don't want to do that.
What's better than more money? More South Asians.
True.
Just inject them right into the economy.
I think there's obviously that's common in Canada, US, and anywhere else where they can get away with importing cheap labor. They're obviously going to do it. I do think like the particular moment, part of it is just companies wanting to essentially hoard labor, because they don't want to be like there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and if there isn't a recession, they don't want to have a situation where they had like laid off a bunch of staff and then they can't meet demand. Or sorry, if there isn't a recession and things keep going, they don't want to have laid off a bunch of staff and then not be able to meet demand. And right now there's a possibility that we do get a quote unquote soft landing and things kind of turn back. The heat comes back on, like especially in like the goods sector, like goods production sector. There's like such a crazy boom during the pandemic of like trying to build shit and then meet demand, and there was like just no supply because there wasn't enough workers and stuff. So I think a lot of it is just there is kind of like a bit of a lack of labor, because there's a lack of labor turnover because companies are just kind of hedging their bets right now.
Yeah, I could see that for sure as well. Like when you're dealing with something like an economy and labor, it's obviously not just a one size or one variable reason for anything. But I do think that basically my take was that was a part of it not being acknowledged.
I think for Canada, for a lot of it, a good chunk of it is that, because if you look at like the wage increases in Canada versus the US, it's definitely, even in the pandemic, it's been like a stark contrast between Canada and the US.
Yeah.
US wages climbing like 5 or 6% over the last year, even though that's a real wage decline given inflation was like whatever 9, but Canada was like half that. Like our wage growth was much lower, even though our inflation levels were comparable.
Even
so I think that
pandemic, like that was something I noticed as well. Like compared to the States, like our wage growth has been pretty bad, and I think a lot of that stems from the companies just saying, like, "Hey, government, do us a big solid here. Import as much cheap labor as you possibly can. Keep wages low. Like we don't want to pay it." And again, yeah, like I said, it's not obviously just one variable, but I think that's a big variable that is not being talked about. And it was really just really funny to see StatsCan coming out like last week and saying that's basically what's happening. Like that's a big, like they're actually pointing that out, saying no, there's a problem here, and it's not the only reason you think it is.
This is more of a question, but do you know how the quote unquote gig economy workers are counted when they're looking at unemployment stuff?
I don't know if they would be full employment. That is something I'd have to look up. I don't know.
Because what I have noticed is there's a ridiculous number of people now that probably don't need to work a traditional job because of the fact that they're doing skip the dishes or in telecom or any of these gig jobs, and that's in rural Canada. Like I think that would be even a higher percentage in urban Canada, but maybe it wouldn't be. But I know, like, working with guys in town, and they just get all their meals, skip the dishes to them, and you'll see a dozen people in the hotel lobby going to deliver skip the dishes. Madness. And it's unbelievable. It's like that. Like, that's a restaurant staff right there, just doing skip the dishes deliveries.
That's what we need, is Tesla teaming up with Uber and just replacing all that shit.
Oh, they're definitely counted in some way, but I don't know the way.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to look because it'd be interesting to see how the gig economy has impacted the numbers for sure.
Because I think like those quote unquote the cheap workers, like they come to Canada, they've got a lower expectation for their quality of life, and I mean, this is complete speculation at this point, but maybe they just see those gig jobs and they're like, I can work 10, 20 hours a week and I can get the quality of life I want. Why would I go get a job at Tim Hortons?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see because then you'd have to look at like whether or not there's a kind of a structural difference. I would say, if anything, the type of person that it's probably native Canadians that are fucking lazy and just sit around and live off of 15 hours to skip the dishes and a welfare check. I don't know.
That probably is a very common.
Yeah, it would be my guess that the immigrants would be like, I'm gonna work like 6 of these. I'm gonna do skip the dishes, Uber, this, that, and the other. You have like 5 different apps they work for.
Yeah, Canada is generally like they're not. But Canada generally puts some sort of effort into selecting immigrants that are like economically positive, impactful. But I mean, it's not.
Yeah, we definitely have value-based immigration, but
And so I don't know. It'd be interesting to see because I don't know. It'd be hard to gather the stats needed, but if you could, it'd be.
It'd probably be impossible to ever know. It's just something that crossed my mind because, I mean, when you're coming from a lot of these countries, like the equivalent amount of work you need to do to get a high quality of life in Canada is so low.
Well, you say that, but if you're living in Toronto, it's like, you know.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. I'm in rural Canada where it's much cheaper to live.
A fucking bedroom, like a single bedroom with roommate shared, is like $1,000 a month. So it's like, yeah, that's quite a bit of actual gig work just to make your rent, and that's shitty quality of life, even for
for sure. Sharing a room with roommates is pretty awful.
You got 5 people in a house, and you're paying $1,000 a month. It's not. You're not exactly living on cloud 9 with that, no matter who you are.
Well, that's all I had for that one. If you guys don't have any more, we're done.
No.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so my second one is a little bit hard to explain because there's a lot of bit of background that's needed. But anyway, there's Peter Singer is like a well-known philosopher, and he's like really, I don't know, I guess into. He's really into like I guess he would have been like the intellectual force behind like effective altruism movement, and like basically he had like a famous paper in the 70s where he argued that I guess it was a book, I think, but it was like basically his argument boiled down to like most people aren't moral because to be moral you need to give most of your, like, if you're living in the Western world and you have like a high quality of life, high standard of living, you should be giving basically all your disposable income to charity to save poor people and give them a better quality of life. So like spending any money on yourself for like luxuries like a new car or new clothes or a cup of Starbucks coffee when you could just like downgrade your quality of life and survive just fine is immoral. And it was kind of like a controversial paper, and I don't know, for various other reasons that are just way too long to get into here, I don't really agree with the paper. But what I will note is that I think the hot take is like effective altruists are not living up to that standard, and Peter Singer isn't living up to that standard themselves because they don't take it nearly far enough, the logic. Because like if you truly believe that like you should be doing everything in your power, like, you know, that doesn't like majorly impact your quality of life or like majorly change your, like, you know, your Western standards of living, then you should be doing all sorts of stuff. Like you should just not pay taxes anymore, for sure. Like it's not actually that big of a deal. Like if you don't pay taxes in Canada, you can't go to jail. There's no debtor's prison. They'll like call you and they might like start garnishing your wages at a point, but it's actually not that big of a deal. And so just don't pay them. Like, what, if you're gonna kill a kid in Africa because you wanna like not get phoned by the CRA? Like that's pretty fucking not nice. Like you're not living
kind
up
of
to
an immoral person.
Yeah, you're not living up to your effective altruism standards. Like, also, like, why are you paying at self checkout again? Question mark. Like, nobody has to do that. Oh, you're costing Loblaws $75 in profit, and whatever his name, Mr. Billionaire fuckhead owner, is making $75 minus his whatever $3 billion profit from this quarter. Like, I'm pretty sure they're gonna survive as a chain industry. You should be stealing your groceries and giving the money to charity. Like, for sure, you should be stealing from self checkout like a lot of money every week.
Don't even talk about how many plastic bags you need to steal.
Well, you should be like, and you should be committing like crimes of opportunity on repeat. Like, if there's something you can steal, like, I don't know, your workplace does some sort of collection where it's easy to steal money from, you should definitely be stealing that. Yeah,
hey,
like, there
baby,
should
I
be
got
a lot
a
of
whole case full of diamonds. I better go smash.
there's a lot of ways to like finesse money in society that's like, by traditional standards, kind of like unethical and immoral, but by Peter Singer standards and effective altruism standards, like, you're saving lives, so you should definitely be doing that. Like,
Yeah, when you actually do that calculus, yeah.
yeah, like because what he's saying is like, yeah, his argument is like, oh well, we should do everything that's like convenient and legal to like donate our salaries. It's like, well, you're a pussy. That's not actually like very deep moral or deep philosophy. You're just doing it because you can do it and you're comfortable doing it. It makes you feel good at night. But you wouldn't feel comfortable not paying your taxes, so you pay your taxes because you're a pussy. You don't actually live up. You don't actually live up to your moral standards, and therefore, fuck you. Like,
His
go the full mile.
Was it Sam Bankman-Fried or Friedman-Bankman? Something like that.
Bankman-Fried.
Bankman-Fried, yeah. Bankman-Fried ran a whole Ponzi scheme while being an effective altruist. I mean, I think he was on the same shit you're on.
Well, see, SBF, if he was actually donating all his income, like, that would actually be effective altruism. If he was finessing fucking 30 billion from retard crypto investors and then giving it to Oxfam, like, that's effective altruism for sure. Yeah. He would be morally justified, but he was spending whatever $300 million on personal property and other shit, so he kind of fucked that up a little bit. But like,
he was on the just tripped halfway to the finish line.
Well, and the other thing too is like, okay, so like Peter Singer, like, he's pretty well known and like reasonably popular. He should be selling out hardcore. Like, he should have an OnlyFans for sure. Because he could raise like millions of dollars for Oxfam with his OnlyFans. Like, Peter Singer OnlyFans is, you know, like, he should be doing. What I'm saying is, he should be doing like crazy risky shit to generate money, or like crazy like out there shit to generate money. Because like, oh yeah, it's a little embarrassing that, you know, you're getting
your wrinkled little dongs on the internet.
Yeah, your wrinkled little dongs on the internet.
It's lives at stake
by some dude or whatever, you went gay for pay or whatever is Peter Singer. Like, that's not like that big of a moral, or that's like not that big of a
sacrifice,
sacrifice or mental hit compared to like saving people. And he's not doing that. That's pretty morally reprehensible in my mind. Like, definitely. Like, I don't know. I guess that's my hot take. Is like, effective altruists are pretty much as hypocritical as the rest of us, because they don't actually go like the full hog on their philosophy. They just kind of do. They're just doing what everyone else does, which is like following a moral line and a reasoning that they're comfortable with and lets them sleep at night and feel good about themselves. And they're not actually doing the nitty gritty of what it takes to be an effective altruist.
I'm going to dovetail a potential hot take that I didn't work up well enough into this one, because I think it fits, is that effective altruism, and especially as you've now described it, where this actually really makes my point in a way that I hadn't figured out yet, is that effective altruism is sort of the modern version of, what do you call it when the Catholic Church asks for money?
Tithings.
Indulgences?
Yeah, it's the modern
indulgences, yeah.
Because rather than, do the hard work to actually live up to Catholic standards, you just paid the Catholic Church money, and then they were like, you know what, we're going to go and do good works with this money, because obviously the Catholic Church is who's in charge of taking care of the poor in medieval times. They run the orphanages, they run the schools, they run the, giving out food, soup banks. as it were. So they figure if you give us enough money to, you know, do good acts, then we'll just say like your debt's square when you get to heaven, and like your good acts offset your bad acts, but like your good acts weren't done by you, they were done by the money you donated to us. And it's like, then it makes you feel morally justified. And obviously the Protestant Reformation, one of their enormous gripes about the Catholic Church was the practice of indulgences.
Yeah, but that's generally viewed as like one of the worst, like one of the biggest, like it's one of the biggest bullets in the critics of Christianity's gun, is that indulgence.
I agree. Like all I'm saying is, yeah, if you're actually an effective altruist, I better see you doing some fucking
crazy shit.
Some societally,
you better be sucking a dick on OnlyFans.
Societally unacceptable things, right? Like, because who gives a shit about society? Like, if you truly believe in that morality, then you shouldn't care about being like slightly ostracized or slightly looked down upon. It's like that's not a big, that's his whole that's Peter Singer's whole argument is like it's not a huge inconvenience, and it's not a huge like cost to you. And so yeah, you should be like, the cost that they're actually willing to take is like foregoing some Starbucks and a new car. It's like even then most effective altruists don't make it, because SBF was sort of the poster boy for effective altruism because he was donating hundreds of millions. It's like he was also spending tens of millions on himself. To be fair, Peter Singer is more like actually puts his money where his mouth is on that front, where I think he does live a pretty modest lifestyle, like more or less. But there's a couple other in the movement that don't get like the press that SBF or whatever does. But it's like modest lifestyle is because they're comfortable with it, and it just like, to me, it's again like the hot take is like they're just kind of like that's their they get more utility out of donating their money than these small pleasures or luxuries because of their own psychology. And they don't actually take the logic of their arguments to the conclusion that they should, to be consistent with their own proposed moral system, right? Like, and the proof's in the pudding of them paying taxes and not doing some freaky shit.
I remember a story about an American, I forget who the American was, an important, prominent philosopher, just stopped paying taxes during the American-Spanish War because he was a pacifist. So he got arrested and thrown in jail. And it's like, that's the guy who was firm with his convictions.
Yeah.
He wouldn't pay the government because the government was doing something against his beliefs.
In Canada, like I said, you cannot go to jail for
tax evasion.
You can for tax evasion, but for tax debt, you can't. And you can find ways to legally avoid paying like some percentage of your taxes. That is not that hard, and all you'll do is accrue a debt with the CRA, and they'll call you and they'll badger you to pay it, and you can just tell them to blow a dick and that you're donating your money to Oxfam, and and
then they'll say, "Oh, you're an effective altruist." Okay, sorry to bother you, sir.
Eventually, they might garnish your wages, but I mean, theoretically, you're already sending most of your wages to Oxfam, so it's not a big deal to you if eventually they get around.
Oxfam's getting hurt in that equation.
Pardon me?
Only Oxfam loses when they start garnishing your wages.
You're much better, like, the kids are much better off having you donate the money now and donate more, and like, yeah, maybe eventually they get around to garnishing your wages, but you'll survive that, and just money that would have went to Oxfam was already sent, so it's all good. Like I said, they don't do any of that stuff, so weak shit. That's all I got.
Bryce, are you wanting to add on to that with an actual hot take, or?
Oh, that was all I wanted to add on to that hot take. Are you going to move on from that one now?
Yeah, I think we're good on that one.
Yeah, okay. So you can move to yours.
Yeah, so the next one I had, and as you can tell, I've been deep in the old history podcasts recently, is, if you haven't heard of it, there's the great man perspective on history, where history's driven forward by the actions of a few great men, and that's pretty much the traditional way of viewing history. And then there's the trends and forces way of viewing history, where it's like, people exist and they do things, but generally speaking, there's trends and forces at play that matter more than what individuals do. So, what I propose is that the most important part of the great man theory is the implied great retard theory that goes with it. And what that is that if you have a great man, he's going to lead the nation to greatness. And if you have a great retard, he's going to drive it into ruin. Because what you consistently hear about when listening to stories of these countries on their rise and conquering their neighbors and doing all sorts of amazing feats is that, unsurprisingly, many of those neighbors that get conquered and defeated are led by morons and idiots. And that this...
retards, as you were.
Yes. And this, in my opinion, is a stronger refutation of the trends and forces adamant trends and forces people than the great man theory, because what they'll say with a great man is, oh, the society was ripe for somebody to come in like Napoleon and take control, grab the reins, and take over Europe. And it's like, oh, well, was the society ripe for somebody to just come in, get shit-faced drunk all the time, and then die of liver cirrhosis, leaving no heir, and then have a fight for succession that led to a civil war that tore his country apart, and then his neighbor, let's say his neighbor's Napoleon, just comes in and takes over his country? Like, I think that guy had a pretty big influence on history by being an idiot that cannot be accounted for by the trends and forces of history, because they were certainly not compelling him to drink himself to death and leave no heir. Like, it's just, there's so many stupid things that happen in history as a result of having stupid leaders or stupid people in positions of power that you just cannot explain these by trends and forces, other than the trend is that once in a while you're gonna
you gotta delineate like the difference between like trends and forces and great man, though. Like,
well, I guess like trends and forces just being there's economic prosperity, so the Roman Republic did well and had a food surplus, and people moved in, and then they had more people, and then they fought a war and they had more people to lose, and then they lost more people in the war, but they won the war because they had more people because of these economic forces that had led to immigration 100 years ago or whatever.
I think for like just the Roman example, you could say like, oh, well, Rome had like really good geography and climate for like growing a lot of this may be total bullshit, but I'm just like example, growing crops, and therefore they were able to like have bountiful harvests and economy, which led them to spread. Whereas the great man theory would be like, no, Julius Caesar was like really kick-ass and fucked shit up and expanded Rome. It's like kind of the two different like the trends and forces people would be like, well, if Julius Caesar was never born, then there'd be Julius Caesar and he would have conquered everything. Because Rome was just poised to conquer everything because they had like great economy or something. Like that's kind of like the difference. Whereas like the great man theory is like there's a lot of random chance of like these people coming up, and so I guess price point. There's also a lot of like RNG in terms of getting total retards.
It's people. It's like the great man theory can be challenged by the great forces theory on the sense that like, oh, somebody had to come up and lead these forces, and it was just inevitable. But then at the same time, it's like it doesn't seem to work if you're just talking about a completely inept, incompetent ruler who does things on his own personal life that should not be affected at all by the trends and forces in society that wreck his country.
Yeah. I really like this take because...
Well, what if it's just one trends and force, and it's like people are very, very retarded in general, and therefore they bring in very, very retarded leaders, and there's your trend and force is just a series of retardation throughout history.
Yeah, the trend is retardation.
Retard is a strong word. I won't use it in this context, but I'll say like the personal life choices with the Mongols are the best example in history, because... in Europe, only Hungary and Poland really got fucked by the Mongols. I guess Russia, if you want to include them in Europe. But the only reason only Hungary, Poland, and Russia got fucked by the Mongols is because Ogadai, the second Khan after Genghis Khan, drank himself to death. And, he might have had a bunch of STDs contributing to that too, according to his doctors. But, like, STDs and drinking led to an early grave, and effectively stopped the Mongol army from seemingly inevitably, based on the trends and forces, conquering Europe. And the guy wasn't a retard, but his personal alcoholism and debauchery led to an early death that saved Europe and deeply impacted the rest of human history.
Oh, we're refining our trends and forces because we can add debauchery and degeneracy to the retardation, and then that's our best refutation of your great retard theory so far. But yeah, I see where you're going with it. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it's so hard to refute the attempt to refute it with the great man theory, because as you said, it could be Publius Maximus that conquered Gaul instead of Julius Caesar, and it was right for the taking. But
I feel actually both of those two things, both like great man theory, great retard theory plus trends and forces actually makes sense.
Well, I'm just saying the great man theory implies the great retard theory because you're saying individuals have an enormous impact on history, but it's just the trends and forces. But not acknowledging individuals, I think it misses on the largest part. It actually misses is the idiots who run things into the ground.
Yeah, and history is so replete with examples of that. It's kind of hard to ignore.
Yeah,
just like it's like that one stock trader back in early days of American stock trading. He just got fucking hammered, crashed the economy because he started selling and buying a bunch of crazy shit. I can't remember exactly what it was, but like he single-handedly fucked up the economy for a bit because he just got so drunk.
I don't know if we covered it on this podcast, but there's also that one trader that there's like the oldest bank in England, or one of the oldest banks in England. He single-handedly bankrupted the bank that was like a 187-year-old bank because he was making bad trades in East Asia.
Yeah, exactly. It's like shit like that. It's like that's going to alter the entire course of like English history and therefore world history in a lot of ways.
One guy that knew how to use a printer to fake documents and do some fucked up shit just crashes a storied and historic bank, and it's just pretty based, honestly.
It's amazing, just like there's so many incidents in history that are just one guy doing something stupid. It's like
actually it's quite amazing.
Stupid. Oh yeah, I think I find it hard to argue against that.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, anything more on that, you guys?
That's all I've got for that.
All right, so my last one's actually going to be a little bit different than what I was thinking, but it's just something that I've noticed with quite a few people and even a bit myself, and that's basically that with the lack of religion in the West nowadays, a lot of people start to treat their career as like their source of religious meaning, and I don't think they really realize they're doing it. And I think like my basic hot take here is that's actually a bit more that's more common than people think or even acknowledge, and it's not a good thing at all for various reasons. Basically, like I think one of the things, like I think from like just a quick pulse check, I think most people, if they agreed with that premise that people are starting to do that, they kind of see the problem there, where treating your job as like a religious meaning wouldn't be great for your overall mental health. But overall, I just think that that's actually what a lot of people are doing, because I see so many young people like going into fields saying that they're looking to change the whole world, and not that there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with that, but I think like approaching your career that way is a bad call, strictly because like one, it's just a job. You can lose that job and kind of be forced out of a career, and if you've put a bunch of like deep personal meaning into that, like that could be extremely difficult to handle, and then you don't have like a proper fallback position. Like, and the other thing is, if you get pretty religiously fanatical about something and that's your career, it's like you're working for a company that probably doesn't actually give a shit, and if you like, you could do a lot of damage that way, I think, just like on a societal level, especially if we're calling in the great retard theory. Like, it just takes one guy going pretty hard in the paint for like a religious purpose at work, goes full retard. Because I do see this pretty widespread with a lot of people that I know personally, and just like see talk of it online. Like they're like flailing around for meaning, and they're trying to find it in their careers. And I just think it's like, man, that's going to end really badly overall.
Well, I'll just say a much better solution is putting all that sort of search for meaning into the opposite sex or the same sex, but romantic relationships. That's what will fill that void.
Yeah.
But I can see what you're saying for sure, because people are trying to fill that void with anything they can, and work is a pretty obvious central component of people's lives that they can fill that void with.
Yeah.
Attempt to, at least.
And the reason I say this is because I get that sense myself as well, trying to do that. Like, doing the work that I do, like not having like a religious component to your life I think is extremely distressing for people, even if they don't believe in I don't believe in God. But like losing that piece of your life is really hard, because it like, I think it's just innate to everybody. Like religion is obviously like an evolved or evolutionarily adaptive thing that's present in all races and cultures. So like losing it is a big deal, and just shifting that over to your career, I just think is probably one of the dumbest things you can do. And I think a lot more people, I think some people are starting to wake up a little bit to that, because I do see, like, you saw that with the pandemic, where people are like the quiet quitting and whatnot, kind of realizing like, oh fuck, like I'm working so hard for this job that it's just a bunch of stupid online meetings now. Like fuck this, even if it's actually like a decent place of work, and a company that might be aligned with something better than just producing some fucking garbage like gadget or whatever. But like, man, like one of the things I saw is like, just like even some of the corporate leaders talk, like I've dealt with them before, and just like they think they're changing the whole world with whatever product they're making. It's like, man, you just make a fucking like thing. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, you're changing the world. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they really do view it as like a religious thing, and it shocked me. Like,
you can't say that the ShamWow didn't change lives. ShamWow. Wow.
Yeah. Well, there are a few things where it's like, okay, that is a religious piece of history now, and you got to treat it. Same with My Pillow.
What was that sales guy?
My Pillow, that's the future of American religion.
The ShamWow guy, he really was messiah. Like,
beat the shit out of him.
Totally. Didn't he get arrested for some creepy shit?
I think he beat the shit out of a hooker or something like that. Like, he did something very bad, and he went to jail for it.
I think it's a good take. I think there's like so many like things that religion served as like a purpose for, that like people are like slowly being able to articulate as the fuck ups mount from not having it. Mm-hmm. Like the one thing that I was thinking that like religion is so good at is dealing with utopia, because like Christianity, like heaven essentially, is like it pushes utopia out to an otherworldly sphere. So like nobody actually like gets all utopia on other people, because it's like, oh yeah, well, utopia is this thing that like never comes to Earth, like it's this far off thing. And then it also like it like gives everyone a personal utopia, but also a shared utopia, where it's like like heaven is whatever you want it to be, but it's also heaven, and your heaven is my heaven is their heaven, but it's also personally like it's the best for me, but it's also shared with you. Like it's shared but also like personalized. Whereas like now it's like, my utopia is this, and then the other person's like, no, my utopia is this, and they're different, and they like are, because people want to manifest it on Earth, and it's like big fucking disaster, because it's like, oh, I have a different view of utopia than you. It's like, well then
now we're gonna kill each other.
Yeah, we gotta genocide each other, otherwise just shit won't work. And it's like, okay, let's get to genociding. And then whereas like religion is just like, okay, utopia is never gonna be on Earth, and you get your utopia, you get yours, and they're the same but they're different. There you go, problem solved.
Well, it's like, my utopia is 1,000-year Reich, and your utopia is the global workers united with no country over top of them. I guess we're gonna have a problem.
Yeah.
Who gets nukes first? Then nobody gets utopia.
Religion just like never runs into, well, like a Christian religion, like that's why it's
it
like,
can, but not like Catholic. But like some heresies try to have, heaven on earth kind of deal.
Yeah, that's true. But like I think a lot of
Eternal
religions
jihad.
solve like many of these problems, and one being like, like Con was saying, like a purpose in life, and then people go to, they find some other substitute, but usually a substitute has many problems because it doesn't, it's not as refined.
I guess I should bring up that the one thing that does have, like when your job genuinely does have that sort of religious purpose, then it's vocation is the word for it.
Or calling.
Or like a calling.
Yeah.
And that's like, going into the priesthood for some people, or going and being a teacher for some people, or a nurse. Like going into the caring professions, I believe is still often a vocation.
I wouldn't knock those in a sense, but I still think you need kind of like some form of spirituality, like above and beyond that, because like if you put all of your, let's just call it spiritual or religious, let's just call it spiritual, like eggs in that basket, and then you get, shit canned over something, and like, you lose your life, like if something bad happens, it's like, well, then you're kind of screwed. Like if you're only putting it into that profession, that's all you can do. I still think that could be the problem. But I do think that those jobs are actually like qualitatively different in that sense. But like one of the things that made me think about this is just seeing like a lot of the, people within film and entertainment, like believing that their work is changing lives and saving lives and stuff like this. It's like, you
deranged.
just lost your, like a part of it is they're just fucking lunatic Hollywood people, but I think a part of it is actually like a deeper spiritual problem that they're having, and they're kind of like flailing around, and they've now like attached that meaning to their profession, and that's where I think it can get dangerous societally, because now you believe that you're on like a religious quest in what you're doing. It's like, well, you could be fucking wrong, and if you put it more towards like your own personal spiritual journey, you're not gonna, hopefully, at least like in the more modern times, like Islam aside, like it's more of a personal quest, and you're not hopefully going to do nearly as much damage if you get into a position of power and thinking that you're, like now on the holy mission. It's just, I just don't see it in any way being like personally or societally a good thing for people to view it that way. And I do have a correction. His name, that guy, the ShamWow guy, he was not actually jailed, but he did beat the shit out of a prostitute. He just was not charged. How did he go to jail? They never prosecuted it for some reason.
Just like, wow.
He just provided the ShamWow to clean up the bloody hotel room.
Detective's like, wow, that's clean.
His name is Offer Shlomi, or Vince Offer. But yeah, like he actually didn't go to jail. I'm just don't want to be spreader of fake news, but he did beat the shit out of the prostitute in a hotel
allegedly.
room.
He wasn't convicted. It's all alleged.
It was a physical altercation, so they, with both like claiming the other one did it, but apparently like the hotel room was actually fucking super bloody and gross. Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time where a female assaulting a man turns into the female getting the shit kicked out of her.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
It was, yeah, it's just...
No, that's, yeah.
We keep this factual here, though, so I had to correct myself.
Yeah. But he definitely had a calling. Like, vocation definitely.
Apply to Mr. Vince Offer.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have anything more on the...
I'm done bitching about people's religious problems.
Yeah, I don't got anything to throw onto that one.
Same.
Well,